Good evening, everybody. I'm going to talk about a forensic investigation that we did into the hack of a data center and the theft of intellectual property relating to player data, and how we investigated the hack and the subsequent data breaches around the world. This investigation was probably took 6 months in terms of some of the key steps. But you'll see in terms of some of the more complicated steps in the back, you'll see where we have subsequent data breaches that took a bit of time. We also realized during the investigation that there are certain ways in which you can shortchange certain legal processes, particularly with the extradition of hackers and using Interpol red notices, and I'll touch upon those as we get to them. We had a bit of excitement in the last few hours. I had to rejig some of the data. Some of the lawyers didn't like what I was going to show you. So you will see some of the presentation is live. We've got live video footage. I've just had to obfuscate some of that data in terms of some of the legal processes. In terms of what you see, everything here is guided by external legal counsel. So when we move from jurisdiction to jurisdiction, and there's different pieces of legislation, we first speak to the legal counsel in terms of what we want to do. They would sign it off, and off we go, and we do whatever we want to do in some of those jurisdictions. You'll see we use a lot of tech. I initially was a developer and a database administrator before I moved into forensics. So a lot of the tech I'll talk about and I'll show you is very IT-centric. In the most recent 6 months, we've moved a lot of the tech into AI, where some of the AI is looking at some of the social media content, it's determining sentiment, and we're able to use a bit of AI to play around and try help us link and associate people. Before we're going to start, I'm going to just talk to you about certain parts of the gaming and betting industry. I'm going to quickly run through that because understanding that is important to what really happens in the background and what we are able to investigate. So simplistically, there's a gaming server, there's a payment processor, and then there's an operator. And then depending on how the relationship is set up with the operator, and that would be the brand that you would see, like a Bet365, it's normally hosted within a data center that's replicated around the world. You may have hot and dark sites. But in most instances, it's got what most people would term fairly sophisticated systems. But recently, you would have seen the MGM breach. And then what you're seeing there is the underbelly of some of the, call it old school gaming operators, where although they have intrusion detection systems, some of their kind of protection measures are still very archaic. So what we're also finding is that parts of the gaming and betting business is in highly regulated markets. So what has that done? It has started an underbelly of what people are called gray operators. So people who want to operate a casino, they don't want to go through the regulation, they don't want to become a licensed operator, and they start operating in all of these gray markets. So we've seen a proliferation of attacks on gaming and gambling companies over the last few months. So simplistically, when a player comes, and that would be you and me, we want to go to an operator, we want to go register. So what we do in the background, in order to protect those player databases, because those player databases is what's the value. Those are the players that come, and they spend about 50,000 euros a month in some of those casinos, is we create fictitious and passive, we create fictitious players, and they be active or passive. So a passive player is just a person on a database who doesn't really play, and then an active fictitious person is one that plays. So we put money into their account, and they are seen to be playing. And the reason why we do that is because a lot of the people that facilitate organized crimes will look at their database, they'll look at people who are not active, and they'll kind of isolate those out of some of the kind of databases they want to steal. What we also see is people will create these fictitious plays on their competitors to see what their competitors are doing, but also what they're trying to do is to see if there's anything new and innovative happening on that front. We also have a big affiliate network, and they are out there to really source new players, convert historical inactive players to active players, and they're trying to incentivize those players to spend more. What we are able to do with those affiliates is we're able to identify and track them using tracking markers, which is really an alphanumeric number. And what that allows the operator to do is to monitor the players, calculate the revenue, and calculate the commissions. But as you can imagine, affiliates are incentivized to bring in new players, and also they, through that mechanism, are incentivized to go out and basically steal players, because the more players they can convert and bring over to an operator, the more money they can get. So they are the bane of my life, and it's probably the cause of a lot of the work we do in this kind of space. So the different operators will keep, or the affiliate kind of groupings will keep information about their affiliates. They use tracking markers, and through that we are able to identify a whole lot of information about these affiliates. And the reason why we want to track these affiliates, they're often complicit in some of the work that we are doing. What you'll see now is what started out as what we call a foreign marketing campaign. And what happens is a marketing campaign that would be sent out by a marketing system such as MailChimp would send a promotion emailer to a compromised database. And that's the first kind of marker that we have that somebody knows about our seed or our fictitious player. And as soon as we can see mailers going to those fictitious players, we know something's up. And often what those mailers are saying is, if you come and play for this operator, we'll give you X incentive to switch, and then we know that there's something up, and that's often what starts our work. And we know as well, a lot of these syndicates would upload their mailing list to data centers, and you'll see here we raid the same data center multiple times, because different syndicates who happen to know each other didn't realize that they were all uploading it to the same data center. So data breaches is where we see unsolicited marketing campaigns targeting players that are fictitious, that we know that they belong to us. They are incentivized players to switch and move their spend from one casino to another. And often the financial impact is quite severe. We find that once you've redirected a player to a competitor casino, 70% of those players never come back. So there's a huge incentive for these players to be kept within those operators or within those family of gaming and betting systems within the same family of operators. So often what we do is we would have a look at the mailing campaign, have a look at the metadata under the mailing campaign. That would reveal a whole lot of kind of URLs, affiliate codes, marketing campaign numbers, a certain casino and other marketing information that's hidden in that mailer. And as soon as we get that, we start loading those into our systems, and then we start running our investigations. So in terms of our case study, Big Bucks Casino, it's a huge online casino. It is one of the leaders in the market. You will see there's been a huge shift to America, Latin America, and other jurisdictions. So there's a huge amount of push to take brands and kind of modify them to new markets. This particular casino believed that they were a level 3 organization. And the reason why I'm telling you this is if you're a level 3 organization, you normally have defined processes. You most probably ISO certified, and in most instances, everything is well structured. So with that comes a false sense of security. And those of you who are CISOs and look after cybersecurity will know it doesn't help what's out on paper. Holes are being created the whole time, and if you don't have proper processes, you're a happy hunting ground for hackers. So from a technology perspective, they had gigabyte pipes connecting different offices. They had a fairly good demilitarized zone. They had about 1,000 software developers and in essence 1,000 suspects. They use a whole variety of technologies on their platform, and they had a very, very small security team. They had about 4 people. From a technology perspective, they had multiple data centers, they had hot sites, dark sites, they had everything which we would hope to see. And then we get on to our case study. So the case study commences in December. where there's a hack that takes quite a while to be discovered. And then we start realizing that there were subsequent data breaches. So there was one in the subsequent April, November, March, May, September, October, and finally we terminated it. So in the space, and those of you who work with data that is mailed, the client said at the end of at the 8th breach or the 8th activity, this data is now worthless. There's no point us pursuing it, and you'll see later that the 8th instance is where organized crime in Bulgaria got hold of the data and they decided to monetize it. And when you see that individual's face, our client said, would you want to go and find him? I said, no, thanks. Let's call it quits. So in terms of what we discovered about the hack, it commenced on the 20th of December, and we had a look at how the individual or individuals accessed the data center. And what we discovered is the way the person logged into the Citrix server via remote session was there for a specific reason. And we believe it was done because they had knowledge that the proof point inside a threat management system was configured in a certain way, and they were trying to bypass that. So that was the first marker to us, that the person had knowledge of that infrastructure. Later on, they logged in 6 days later. They logged in, they had a look at certain domain credentials. They extracted a list of database instances, pinged a couple of databases, took down the IP address. They verified permissions. They deleted some of their tracks, and they logged out. Here again, we realized that these individuals knew the environment because of the way they had tried to log in and the things they were trying to test. So that was our second marker that they had knowledge of the infrastructure. They came in again later that night, and they basically came in and ran a few queries which failed, and we could see the path that they were tracking. It was an older path that was 2 to 3 years old. They collected a whole lot of sys databases, and they built a few queries, and they logged off. And later that night, they came back in. They ran a whole lot of scripts. They kept it under certain limits, and they then extracted that data to 2 IP addresses. At first, we were quite excited until we started having a look at those IP addresses, and we had a look, and one was at a bus stop convenience shop, and then the other one was at a coffee shop in the Netherlands. And we realized there was no point in us pursuing those IP addresses. You could see that all the files were deleted, and all the alerts that had been configured had been deactivated. After the event, they had been reactivated. And then it went quiet. So what did we discover? In March, we discovered that there was a marketing campaign, that these fictitious players, or seeds as we call them, were inserted on 17th of December. The SIM identified that the CISO's user credentials were compromised. The network had been breached between the 20th and 27th of December, and the log files were only available until the 30th of November. So we had nothing to go with. There was a reason for that, which we'll get to. And unfortunately, the CISO was on vacation, and as circumstance would have it, he was on holiday from the 15th to 21st of December, and then again from 24th of December to the 1st of January. He had had an issue with his laptop. He had sent it in. The old laptop was wiped out, and he was given a new laptop. So any information or any digital evidence we could have had was gone. So what did we find out about the malicious actor? They were highly skilled, the way they moved around the network. They knew what they were doing. But what we were able to discover is that they had assistance. Because of the way they had traversed across the infrastructure, they knew the environment, but the knowledge they had was about 2 to 3 years old. And through the different transaction monitoring systems, we were able to determine that there must have been some insider assistance. So with that, we created a quick methodology with the client. And those of you who saw my talk last year would have seen when we create the methodology, we often have to have moral moral and ethical conversations with our clients, and that is how far we're allowed to go in terms of the law, but in terms of some of the instances that we want to do. So, for example, forensic profiling, social engineering, can we ethically hack? Can we do offensive forensics? Can we turn around? And often this is where we keep the lawyers very busy. And in this instance, you'll see we also needed close protection on a multitude of instances, because here we got detained in two different jurisdictions based on the work we were doing and law enforcement, first of all, agreeing to what we were doing and then subsequently disagreeing with what we did. So in terms of the kind of phases we did, we started or lodged a criminal complaint after we started investigating the hack, and we had enough information to open up a criminal complaint. The reason why we did that is we could see, first of all, it was a criminal act. Two, we could see that some of these actors were living in different parts of the world, and we knew that we were going to have to travel to different parts of the world. And we found that there was quite an iterative process, because as we were investigating different instances of the hack and then the data breaches, we got more information. And then we had a cyclical process around finding more people, finding more information. You'll see we use a whole lot of different products. We just type in a person's name and it kind of maps out their social network. We find aunts, cousins, anybody else that's connected, and anything we can find that's weak as a weak point into that person, and we would exploit it. And then because of there were subsequent data breaches, we had to keep on going through an iterative process. So basically, starting the process, we had to set up a whole lot of systems. We created our sock puppets for a social engineering perspective, because as we were going through the data, we were having to engage with a whole lot of different people and showing our face. So we had to fly into jurisdictions, we had to meet with people who would then facilitate a different process, we had to pretend to be buyers of data. And here we had a team of bodyguards that followed us everywhere. We subsequently met the hacker, and we had a whole lot of 3 separate teams of special forces operatives looking after us during a meeting at a hotel. So in terms of the hack, first thing we did is we had to isolate certain staff, and we interrogated them for 2 days. In the jurisdiction where we were allowed to interrogate them, and in essence, we had to determine who was complicit and who wasn't. Some of those individuals and myself are not the best of friends, because it's an unfortunate process, because you don't actually know who's innocent and who's guilty. We also then had to determine how much digital evidence was available, because as we said, there weren't enough logs, the laptop had been replaced, and it became a bit of a complicated situation for us to investigate. We then also used the law to the full extent, so we used different laws in different jurisdictions. So if there's any link through the US, we can use a whole lot of kind of levers. We can use a John Doe type criminal complaint. We used legislation in Israel, because we could see there were different components backed into Israel. There was a component in South Africa. And with Interpol, we finally found a whole bunch of people in Thailand. And the reason why Interpol is quite key to this process is they can issue red notices where they can isolate and eventually detain certain people. And in Thailand, they get about 2,000 red notices on criminals that are being sought. So when we were able to come with them and say to them, here's where we found these individuals, we got a lot of assistance. So then we investigated a whole bunch of subsequent data breaches, and each one was different, and we had to kind of try and connect the dots. We then had to kind of throw discrete pieces of information into systems and try manual, kind of on-the-ground kind of surveillance, whilst we used technology to try and hunt for people using their faces and using different components, such as email addresses and IP addresses. And it's around connecting those breadcrumbs of information. We were also then, we got some specialists to help us profile, and there's different methods of profiling individuals. But basically, we got to know all these different individuals, and we used the information that we knew about them to target them. So the one guy, Chaim, he was married, he had 2 young kids, and we basically used that against him in a conversation to say, your kids are not going to see you for the next 15 years in terms of your legislation. You've got 2 jurisdictions to choose where we're going to arrest you, but I suggest you cooperate and get all this mess away from you. Social engineering is one of the areas we love doing because while it's very intensive, it is really nice to be able to kind of get to a point where you're able to exploit a subject, be it a hacker that has actually gone and hacked into your system. And they are trying to sell your data, and it's how you kind of turn the tables back on them. And the biggest challenge for us is, of course, they must never know who we are and how we disappear. So in terms of the first data breach, this is the major part where people tried, where they hacked and then they used the data that had been stolen. So what they had stolen were 9.8 million player records, and the value of that player database was probably $450 million. So it was incredibly valuable. So we were able to connect a whole lot of people based on information from a foreign marketing campaign, so what they were trying to send as promotion emails. So we were able to pick up information about the affiliate that was driving that code, and we found 3 entities. We were then able to connect 3 different affiliates back to that initial information based on a common use of an IP address, and we were then able to isolate 2 individuals. Now, these individuals were known by name. They were legends in the industry, but nobody had ever seen their faces. They always had Skype chats without video. They sent emails. There was very little known about them. We then started looking. We found more connections, different entities, and we were able to then kind of create a map of how these different affiliate codes were all interconnected, and that allowed us to kind of add more breadcrumbs to the story, and we eventually drew this mind map of how we could connect databases, emails, websites to each other. We then, whilst we were going through that mind mapping, we discovered that there was a certain pattern to that information. We followed a few leads, made a few phone calls, and we located an individual by name who hadn't been seen for quite a few years and had really disappeared, but we were given a few pieces of information. We used that information and we kind of put some of that data into our toolbox, and some of the information is around how we can use it in products like Shadow Dragon and other Python kind of AI products that allow us to play around with systems and mask and play around with forget passwords. And we were able to create a network diagram of the individual. We then were able to map connections to different members of the family. We were able to find records in corporate registries, and we hit a lucky part where we found an Airbnb post, and we discovered that he was living in Switzerland. So as we were busy packing up, we found his wife had an Etsy account, and we connected and started buying off her Etsy account to see what kind of information we were being passed and where the entity was registered. We then discovered that the husband had also posted a job request on a bulletin board. We basically used one of our sock puppets, responded to the job application. We took canary tokens, injected them in different parts, and we geolocated to a block of flats. We then had to investigate how the telephone numbers had been allocated to those blocks of flats, and we then started following sequentially how the numbers had been allocated to the block of flats. And we tried this for several days to mimic a DHL courier to wanting to deliver a parcel. One morning, after a 3-day period, the mother-in-law happened to be in the flat. She answered the phone and said, yes, he lives here, but he's in Israel for 2 months. So what we did is we then went back to our source. We discovered that there was a person in Israel that had 10 days left to live because they had a rare form of leukemia. And surprise to us, he was able to speak to us, but that we were only allowed to speak to him once, and that we were never allowed to contact him again. From us, there was no issue with that, because if he wasn't going to be around for 10 more days, then we didn't ever believe we were going to ever speak to him again. So what we then did is we sent out a team of private investigators in Israel to start monitoring and conducting surveillance of little information we have about this person. We got onto a plane, And prior to us departing, we told the Hub 433, which is Israeli FBI, that we were on our way. And in Istanbul, they tagged us, pulled us over, and spent quite a few hours talking to us. They were not happy that we were going to go into Israel and what we were going to do. So, as instructed, we arrived in Tel Aviv. We took an unmarked taxi. We had to get rid of our close protection, and we drove a few hours into the middle of a desert to a coffee shop. Here's our team, and what we did very slowly but surely is we went through our mind map. And our source was shocked at how we were able to connect information, but he gave us a few clues. One, you're looking for the Godfather, and the Godfather, he said, was in Asia, was probably in Thailand, and he was probably in Bangkok. Two, if you find his brother, you'll find him. They live together. They are inseparable. Three, he loved visiting Western-themed bars, so cowboy-style bars. And four, he loved to play pool. So we plugged all of that into our model, and we then regrouped at the Hilton when one of our colleagues got a call, and basically Lahav 433 once again had spoken to our colleague and said we needed to come in. They wanted to speak to us. We then engaged with our legal team, and it was around the confidentiality of what we had, and the legal team said, scan what you've got, put it into a cloud, shred everything, and get the hell out of there. So we tried to do that. But of course, as you can imagine, we tried to check in Tel Aviv, and we had no flights to check in. They had been cancelled. We were then separated at security, and our team were interrogated. I, unfortunately, was left. I don't think they thought I was of any relevance. And there you can see me sitting and waiting for my team to be let out one by one. So what did we discover? So we discovered that there were a whole bunch of entities in different jurisdictions in the world, all the really hard ones to investigate. And then what we did is we took the information that had been confirmed to us, and we started two kind of investigations. One on the ground, we got a team of investigators, and then we started an open source intelligence investigation, and one in the deep and dark web, trying to make a whole series of connections. We then pumped that into products like Periscope, Shadow Dragon, and a whole bunch of other platforms that were then starting to link and associate data. And we then started mapping out the family relationships. So you'll see in the middle there, we've got Yuval, the Godfather. We don't have a photo of him. We managed to identify his mother, his father, a whole series of wives, most of which were estranged. We discovered that there was a brother that had been implicated in the biggest fraud. And through a process, we connected a whole bunch of different people. Children, who we later social engineered. So, for example, the son went to go visit his father, put a photo of the two of them together skiing on a boat, and we were able to then use information to work out where, in fact, they were. We also discovered that there was an issue where they had fled the country and gone to Thailand. And then we discovered later on that there was a Thai girlfriend, initially misconnected to the wrong individual. There was a hacker, and then another guy who had also been very active in this market and just disappeared off the face of the earth. And then what we did is we pumped it into machines, and we let the machine go hunting, and we then put people on the ground, and we started telling them, go to the Western bars, and started unraveling. So within days, the two teams kind of coordinated. We were using tech which had taken photos of what we had known, and lo and behold, clues 3 and 4 was what gave up our hackers. So, as we said, he liked Western-themed bars, so we had been targeting Western-themed bars. He had played pool, I think, on a Thursday night, and unfortunately, he started winning competitions, and we started finding lots of photos of him. In the background, you'll see something which is the pub we found him in, which was Mega Break in Bangkok. And then through us digging around and started trying to connect dots, we actually found that he had been a hacker, and he had hacked an online stock exchange, and he had actually given a talk about it. But that had caused lots of issues in his life. So we started realizing that our sophisticated hacker had actually done some really good hacks, and his colleague there, which was Yaron, they like to boast about the exploits and who they had hacked. So then what we started doing is we started doing lots of surveillance. We discovered a place called Wonderland where these brothers were staying, and we had on-the-ground surveillance. We had individuals there, and then we got a guy who basically, so this is a backup body cam.
Yeah, I did 3
and what he's doing is he's basically passing Yuval a message. So what happens here, I phone these guys and I say, please just go give this guy a note and tell him to give me a call. So these are the guys who have basically found them. They've been doing the surveillance in Wonderland, and all they're doing over here is they're driving to them and saying, here's a note, please phone Peter. And that then starts a series of events where we convinced the hacker to come and actually meet us.
Hey guys.
If you hear that audio, you can hear the person's breathing. They were very, very nervous. So we then, while we start negotiating, we pack our bags and we head off to Thailand. We go to a hotel where we realize there's a whole series of security level flaws. Our client insists that if we're going to get hackers, we're going to use a military style, and we appoint a whole security team. And all that security team is their plain clothes, they across the hotel, and they're monitoring where these individuals are. Are they alone? Are people armed? And in Bangkok, we realized that there was a fight going on with the Royal Thai Police and the City Police. We had to get them all involved. And the hacker arrives, comes into the hotel. We have a meeting room, and we say to him, we have connected you to this hack. So his story was the following. He was sitting on a beach in Phuket. Some guy walks up to him and asks him to buy a mailing list. He says, cool. They agree on $5,000. He happened to have his laptop. He whips it out, and he pays for the mailing list, and this guy disappears. So we all knew it was rubbish. And we knew what was going to happen, so that's why we had kind of like done forward thinking in terms of where we thought they were going to run, and Yuval then runs. We go back to the condominium where they were staying at Wonderland. It was all cleared out. And we had discovered beforehand, and that's why we allowed him to run, is that they had bought a property on an island in Thailand.
Project. And record it and basically allow other people
Yuval didn't realize that we were using technology to track him.
to see it, to
listen
to it, and then they will
We were
get
able to
to
find
see
a
me
started
talking about the
retreat,
project.
running like a yoga-style retreat camp. But then we quickly moved on to, and then we kind of paused that part. And the reason why we paused that part is the next data breach happened. And we initially assumed it would be Yuval again. So as we were busy going through, we realized that the affiliate information was fake, but we had access to the bank account because we had opened up a criminal complaint. And we could realize that there was one person connected to that bank account, a shareholder, and there was a connected individual, the last person there. So Chaim was married, he has a wife and 2 kids, and ultimately he had an alias, but we used his family against him, and we convinced him to cooperate. We mapped out his life. We knew how young his daughter was, and we also manipulated him based on his family situation with his parents. We then identified his cohort in this part of the data breach. Her name was Dana. She fell pregnant, which complicated our work because we were busy social engineering her, and then from a moral and ethical perspective, we had to stop because we didn't want to do anything to her in terms of placing a risk on the baby. We mapped her out. We had done surveillance on her. We started making connections. And this is where we started discovering the guy called Gal, who had been missing for 7 years. And then we see another guy called Daria, who Daria eventually arrives. And then one day I'm in a bad mood. I pick up a phone, Both you have been linked because Donna is also making a commission on the stolen data. And I phone Chaim and I say, Chaim, I'm tired of this. If you don't cooperate, I'm going to get you arrested and thrown to prison. And he goes through a process of his phone calls denying any involvement.
Yes.
So in South Africa, I basically explained to him that it's not an accusation. I basically explained to him in the jurisdiction that he was. It's a criminal offense. And within an hour, I get a list of all the stolen data given back to me. And through the social engineering and the social media networking, we discovered that Donna was connected to Yuval's mother because she liked to crochet with her mother. And we'd used that information from a social engineering and exploit perspective to identify the connection and how the original hacker had just passed on information to his friend, Chaim, and Donna, and then how that implicated Gil and a whole series of other people. We then realized that there was another data breach. We had a look at it. The tracking marker was obfuscated, but we were able to find that it was placed in a data center in South Africa. So we got a search and seizure record, kind of process organized, because as you'll see here, we asked them very nicely to please give us back our data. They showed us a big finger. We got a search and seizure. We got 12 policemen to help us, and we raided the premises. We had a 24-hour warrant, and we basically took anything that looked like a server. We had a few complications because we had a 24-hour limit, so we had to remote zip a database that was sitting here in the UK, but we basically took everything that we could, and we kept it for 3 months. But what we were able to do by looking through the data is we were able to connect the different sets of data and the different components of the hack back to these individuals in terms of how they had logged into the data centers, the mailing systems. And we then said, okay, well, now we're connecting more dots. Then there was another data breach, more obfuscation. And in this time, we got another search and seizure, but we consensually were given access to the data instead of us having to take servers away. So we then basically got another search and seizure. We got the data. We connected more information together. Then there was another data breach, same system. They tried to now change the way they were mailing it. They were trying to obfuscate the data again. Got another consensual raid. And we were just, all we were doing, we were just connecting the data and the dots together. And then when we got to the kind of second last one, we realized that they'd kind of really changed it again. And they tried to obfuscate the data, but we started getting more information. They changed the way the mailer looks, and here's an example of a mailer. And basically, here they were being offered a whole bunch of euros to basically go to a different casino. We did a consensual raid again. We connected more dots. And then on the last instance, we had a look, and the data was now sitting at an ISP in Israel. So I'd realized through the connection of all the dots that these individuals all knew each other. So I picked up the phone, and I phoned the person that was connected as an affiliate, and I basically explained, hey, you guys are sitting with stolen data. I said to them, I know you know the person who's the general manager of the data center in South Africa. Give him a call. He'll know me very well, and I suggest you cooperate. He then, through me, spoke to the police, and he handed over the data to the police. So what did we find out here? The Israelis were tired of us raiding data centers and all the different components of what they were doing. So they handed it out to a real gangster looking like that. We did a background search on him. He was military trained. He'd been in and out of prison. And my client said, do you want to go to Romania? And I said, no, I'm not keen. And that guy doesn't look very friendly. So our client terminated the investigation at that point. The 450 million that the database had been valued at had been declining slowly but surely over the use of that stolen data, and said this data is sitting so many places around the world, the value to us is far less as to what it was. So let's just stop it now. So where are we now? So the Interpol has red flagged a whole bunch of individuals, and they cannot move. So we know Yuval. We got a photo of him through his son, Ron, who went to go visit him. We had the brother, who's also red flagged. Chaim is in Israel, who eventually cooperated with us. Yaron, the hacker, we implicated in it and in terms of the hack. Oropin, who we initially thought was Boaz's girlfriend, in fact was the girlfriend of Yaron. And we had started exploiting Yuval's series of ex-wives who were particularly bitter and were then starting to facilitate our criminal action against them. Through the process with Interpol, we were also able to facilitate finding these individuals and then helping Interpol, because Interpol gave us the landing cards. So one piece of advice is, if you are going to flee your country and you're going to go hack, you fill out a landing card. So they'll take a photo of you at the desk. You fill out a card and you say, I'll be staying at the following hotel. We use that information to track down a whole of these individuals. And that's how we connected Oropin to the criminal syndicate. So at the moment, all these individuals are waiting. They've been given the option of going to one of two jurisdictions to go to jail. They're not wanting to go to any of those jurisdictions. And they're sitting there waiting for the legal processes to be exhausted. But in essence, they can't go anywhere. And until they cooperate and decide what they're going to do, they're going to be staying on an island running a retreat. That's me. Thank you very much.